There's a button in the world that literally nobody can press. And no, I'm not talking about some philosophical metaphor or a psychological enigma. I'm talking about a physical, real button that exists in a specific place on the planet and has such absurd, paranoid, and extreme security that even if you were the President of the United States, even if you were the most powerful military leader on Earth, you would still need at least one other person to activate it, because this button was literally designed to never be pressed by a single person, and the reason for this is as terrifying as it is fascinating. So stick with me until the end, because you're going to discover not only where this button is, but also what would happen if someone actually managed to press it. And believe me, the consequences would change the world as we know it forever. This button is located in one of the most secret and protected military installations in existence, a place where security cameras monitor every square millimeter 24 hours a day, where armed guards patrol corridors reinforced with steel and concrete that could withstand even a direct nuclear attack, and where access is so restricted that only a handful of people on the entire planet know the complete password to enter. And even those people need to undergo biometric checks that include fingerprinting, facial recognition, retina scanning, and even voice pattern analysis, because any mistake, any minimal failure in identification could trigger a security protocol that would lock down the place completely and alert all military forces within a radius of hundreds of kilometers. But here's the part that will really blow your mind. This button doesn't control a single weapon. It doesn't launch a single missile. In fact, it's connected to a system so complex and interconnected that pressing it would be like pulling the first domino from a row that stretches across entire continents, because this button, my friend, is part of the nuclear command system of one of the world's superpowers. And when I say nuclear command, I'm not talking about an isolated rocket or a lone bomb stored in some forgotten bunker. I'm talking about thousands of nuclear warheads, each with a destructive power hundreds of times greater than the bombs that devastated Hiroshima and Nagasaki, all ready to be launched in a matter of minutes, all waiting only for a signal, a code, a specific sequence of actions that inevitably begins with someone pressing this button. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but if it's so dangerous, why does this button exist? Why not just eliminate it and problem solved? And the answer to that is as disturbing as it is logical. This button exists precisely because it's dangerous. It was created during the Cold War, that time when the United States and the Soviet Union lived in constant tension, where each side had enough power to destroy the other several times over, and where the only thing preventing nuclear apocalypse was something called mutually assured destruction. A bizarre concept that basically said the following: if you attack me with nuclear weapons, I will attack you back with such force that we will both be completely annihilated. So nobody attacks anybody because nobody wants to die. It's insane logic, but it worked. And for this logic to work, each side needed to be absolutely certain that it could retaliate even after suffering a devastating first attack. So the military created command systems that ensured that even if the main cities were destroyed, even if the political leaders were eliminated, there would still be someone, somewhere, a place with the capability to press that button and launch retaliatory missiles. And that's where things get really grim, because to ensure that this system worked, the military had to confront a profound psychological problem. How do you guarantee that a person would actually press that button knowing that by doing so they would be condemning millions, perhaps billions of people to death? How do you guarantee that at the crucial moment, when the decision needs to be made in seconds, the person won't hesitate, won't think about the families that will be vaporized, the cities that will be transformed into smoking craters, the future generations that will never be born because of that choice? So the military began to study human psychology, to conduct tests, to simulate extreme situations, and what they discovered was shocking. Most people, even trained, even prepared, hesitated when it came time to press the button. There's a famous experiment, unofficially confirmed but widely reported, where a psychologist suggested to the military that to eliminate this hesitation, the nuclear button should be implanted literally inside the chest of a volunteer, an assistant who would always be by the president's side. If the president wanted to launch the missiles, he would first have to take a knife, kill that assistant, open his chest, and only then gain access to the button. The logic was terrifying but clear. If you can't kill an innocent person right in front of you, you shouldn't have the power to kill millions of people you'll never see. Obviously, this idea was never implemented, because it's absolutely insane. But it perfectly illustrates the kind of disturbed reasoning that governed military thinking during that time. And although that specific experiment never became a reality, the principle behind it completely influenced the design of nuclear command systems that exist to this day. That's why this button that no one can press alone exists. That's why there are multiple layers of security, multiple people involved, multiple codes that need to be entered simultaneously, because humanity has learned, in the most terrifying way possible, that giving a single person the absolute power of destruction is simply too risky. So the system was designed so that even the most powerful leader in the world needs confirmation, needs other people agreeing with that decision, needs a chain of command where each link has to consciously choose to go ahead with that apocalyptic order. But here's something that will make you even more uneasy. Despite all these safeguards, despite all these redundant protocols and security systems, there have been moments in history where the world came within seconds, literally seconds, of someone accidentally pressing that button. There is a case that happened in 1983, when a Soviet officer named Stanislav Petrov was on duty at a nuclear command center, and suddenly the alert systems started malfunctioning. The screens showed that 5 intercontinental ballistic missiles had been launched from the United States towards the Soviet Union. The protocols clearly stated that Petrov should immediately report to his superiors that an attack was underway, and if he did, the chain of command would be activated. The Soviet leaders would be awakened, and within minutes the order to retaliate would be given. Thousands of nuclear missiles would be launched towards the United States and its allies, and World War III, the nuclear war that everyone feared, would finally have begun. But Petrov hesitated. Something in that scenario didn't make sense to him. Why the United States? They would only launch 5 missiles if they had thousands. Why start a nuclear war with such a small attack? So, against all the rules, against all the protocols, against everything he had been trained to do, Petrov decided it was a false alarm and did not report the attack. And he was right. It was a system error caused by sunlight reflecting off the detection satellites. But think about it for a second. The fate of billions of people, the future of human civilization, depended on the intuition of a single man who decided not to follow protocol, a man who technically had the power to initiate the process that would lead to pressing that button. And this wasn't an isolated case. There are other equally terrifying examples. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, a Soviet submarine armed with nuclear torpedoes was being pursued by American ships. The submarine had lost contact with Moscow des Alliés, was overheating. The crew was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, and the Americans began dropping depth charges, not to sink the submarine, but to force it to surface. However, the submarine's crew didn't know this. They thought war had begun, that they were under real attack, and the captain decided it was time to use the nuclear torpedo. But that particular submarine had a rule. To launch a nuclear weapon, the captain's decision wasn't enough. The agreement of 3 officers was required: the captain and 2 others, while 2 of them were ready to launch. An officer named Vasily Arkhipov refused to give his consent. He argued that they should try to establish contact with Moscow before making such a drastic decision. And again, a single man, a single decision, prevented humanity from crossing that line. Irreversible. So yes, technically no one can push that button alone. But history shows us that the fate of the world has depended on the sanity, intuition, and courage of individuals who were inches away from doing so. Now, tell me in the comments, would you press that button if it were the only way to save your family, your city, your country? It's an impossible question, I know, but that's exactly the kind of dilemma that the people responsible for these systems need to be prepared to face. And if you found this story absolutely insane, subscribe to the channel, because there's much more content like this coming. And leave a like, because this type of video takes hours to research and produce, and your support makes all the difference. The scariest thing about all this is that those buttons still exist. They're still there, in secret bunkers, in submarines navigating the depths of the oceans, in planes constantly flying around the world, always ready, always waiting, and the weapons connected to them have become even more powerful, even more destructive, even faster. Technology has advanced, but human nature remains the same. We are still the same species that hesitates, that makes mistakes, that acts out of fear or anger or pride, and now we have the power to erase all complex life on the planet in a matter of hours. So, the next time you hear someone talking about international tensions, about diplomatic crises, about countries making threats against each other, remember that somewhere, not too far from where these discussions are taking place, there is a button. And although no one can press it alone, history has already proven that we have come too close, too many times. And perhaps the only reason you are here now, reading this, alive and safe, is because a few people, at crucial moments, chose not to press that button, chose to doubt, chose to hesitate, chose to being human instead of blindly following the protocols they've been taught. And now, click on the video that's appearing on the screen, because there are many more surprising things need to discover that will continue to blow your mind with facts you never imagined existed.